The autumn wind cut through Sarah's thin coat as she stood outside Morrison's pawn shop, clutching the small velvet box that held her grandmother's wedding ring. Her stomach had been empty for 2 days, and the 73 cents in her pocket wouldn't buy much more than a candy bar. The ring was the last thing of value she owned, the final thread connecting her to happier times before everything fell apart. Through the grimy window, she could see Mr. Morrison hunched over his counter, examining something through a jeweler's loupe. The bell above the door chimed as she pushed inside, and the familiar musty smell of old furniture and forgotten treasures enveloped her. Morrison looked up with tired eyes that had seen too many desperate people trading their memories for cash. "What can I do for you, miss?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. Sarah's hands trembled as she placed the box on the counter. "I need to sell this. It's real gold, 18 karat. My grandmother's wedding ring from 1943. The words came out in a rush, as if saying them quickly would make the transaction less painful. Morrison opened the box and whistled low. The ring was beautiful, a simple band with intricate engravings and a small but flawless diamond. "It's a nice piece," he admitted, turning it over in his weathered fingers. "I can give you $200 for it. $200. It would buy groceries for weeks, maybe a month if she was careful." Sarah nodded, though tears burnt her eyes. "Okay." As Morrison began filling out the paperwork, the bell chimed again. A tall man in worn jeans and a flannel shirt walked in, his boots leaving muddy prints on the linoleum floor. He had the kind of face that spoke of long days outdoors, with sun-weathered skin and calloused hands that told stories of hard work. His dark hair was tousled, and there was something gentle about his brown eyes despite the strength in his frame. "Afternoon, Morrison," he said, then noticed Sarah wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt." "No interruption, Jake. Just finishing up some business." Morrison held up the ring. "Beautiful piece. Shame to see it go." Jake's eyes moved from the ring to Sarah's face, taking in her hollow cheeks and the way her clothes hung loose on her small frame. There was something in her posture, a defeated slump that spoke of dreams deferred and hope wearing thin. He'd seen that look before, in his own mirror, back when his family's ranch was failing and bankruptcy seemed inevitable. "Mind if I ask what you're planning to do with that money?" Jake asked Sarah gently. She looked up, surprised by the question from a stranger. "Buy food," she said simply, too tired to be embarrassed by the admission. Jake studied her face for a long moment, then turned to Morrison. "Don't process that sale yet." He looked back at Sarah. "What's your name?" "Sarah. Sarah Chen." "Sarah, I'm Jake Russell. My family owns a ranch about 20 miles outside town. We've been looking for help with the books, someone to handle the accounts and maybe help with correspondence. The pay isn't much, but it comes with room and board." He paused. "You look like someone who might know her way around numbers." Sarah stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "You don't even know me. I know you're trying to sell something precious to buy food. That tells me you're in a tough spot through no fault of your own, and you're doing what you need to do to survive. That's the kind of character we need on the ranch." Jake's voice was steady, matter of fact. "My father always said you can tell a lot about a person by what they'll sacrifice for their basic needs. But I don't know anything about ranching. You don't need to know about cattle or horses. We need someone who can balance books, handle invoices, maybe answer phones. Do you have experience with that?" Sarah nodded slowly. "I was an accounting clerk before I lost my job when the company downsized." She didn't mention the eviction notice, or how she'd been sleeping in her car for the past week. Jake reached into his wallet and pulled out $300. "Consider this an advance on your first month's salary." He placed the money on the counter next to the ring box. "Take your grandmother's ring home where it belongs." Morrison looked between them with raised eyebrows but said nothing. He'd seen enough transactions in his 40 years in business to recognize when something unusual was happening. Sarah's hands shook as she picked up the ring box. "Why are you doing this? You don't know anything about me. My grandfather used to say that gold might buy you things, but it can't buy you loyalty, hard work, or integrity. Those things have to be earned." Jake's smile was warm but serious. "We've tried 3 different people in the past year for this job. They all looked good on paper, but they didn't work out. Sometimes you have to trust your instincts. What if I'm not good at it? What if I disappoint you? Then we'll figure it out together. But somehow, I don't think that's going to be a problem." He gestured toward the door. "My truck's outside. Why don't I drive you out to meet my father and see the place? If it doesn't feel right, I'll bring you back to town, no questions asked." Sarah looked at the money in her hand, then at Jake's earnest face. 6 months ago, she would have been suspicious of such an offer from a stranger. But desperation had a way of making even the most cautious person willing to take chances. And there was something about Jake Russell that made her want to trust him, something genuine in his manner that she hadn't encountered in a long time. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll come look." The drive to the Russell Ranch took them through rolling hills dotted with oak trees, their leaves just beginning to turn brilliant shades of gold and red. Jake's truck was old but well maintained, and he drove with the easy confidence of someone who traveled these roads countless times. He told her about the ranch as they drove, how it had been in his family for 3 generations, how they ran both cattle and horses, how the business side had grown complicated enough that they needed dedicated help. "We're not rich," he said honestly, "but we're stable. Dad's been talking about retiring and turning more of the operation over to me. That's part of why we need someone reliable to handle the paperwork." The ranch house came into view as they crested a hill, a sprawling structure of weathered wood and stone that looked like it had grown out of the landscape itself. Barns and outbuildings were scattered around the property, and Sarah could see horses grazing in distant pastures. It was beautiful in a way that spoke of permanence and belonging, everything her life had been lacking. Frank Russell was waiting on the front porch when they pulled up, a man in his 60s with Jake's same kind eyes and a handshake that conveyed both strength and welcome. Over coffee at the kitchen table, he explained what they needed: someone to manage accounts payable and receivable, handle correspondence with feed suppliers and cattle buyers, maintain records for tax purposes, and generally keep the business side organized. "It's not glamorous work," Frank admitted, "but it's important. And honestly, we need someone who'll stick around. The last 3 people we hired treated this like a stepping stone to something better. We need someone who sees it as a destination." Sarah looked around the comfortable kitchen with its worn wooden table and family photos covering the walls. Through the window, she could see the barn where Jake was feeding horses, his movements economical and sure. There was something deeply peaceful about the scene, something that made her chest tight with longing. "The salary is $800 a month, plus room and board," Frank continued. "There's a small apartment above the office that would be yours. It's not fancy, but it's private and comfortable. $800 a month plus no rent or food costs." It was more security than Sarah had known in months. But more than that, it was the first time in forever that someone had looked at her and seen potential instead of just another person down on their luck. "I'd like to try," she said. "If you'll have me." Frank smiled, the same warm expression she'd seen on his son's face. "Gold isn't what we need around here," he said, echoing Jake's earlier sentiment. "We need someone who understands the value of honest work and loyalty. Something tells me you're exactly what we've been looking for." That evening, as Sarah unpacked her few belongings in the apartment above the ranch office, she took out her grandmother's ring and held it up to the lamplight. The diamond caught the glow and threw tiny rainbows across the wall. Her grandmother had worn this ring for 52 years, through good times and bad, through prosperity and hardship. She thought about Jake's words, gold couldn't buy loyalty, hard work, or integrity. Her grandmother would have understood that. She'd lived through the Depression, had known what it meant to choose between necessity and sentiment. But she'd also known that some things were worth holding on to, worth fighting for. Outside her window, Sarah could see lights on in the main house where Jake and his father were probably settling in for the evening. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, and the chance to prove herself worthy of the trust they'd placed in her. For the first time in months, she felt something she'd almost forgotten existed, hope. The ring went back into its box, but not because she was ashamed of it or because it represented failure. It went back into the box because it represented continuity, the promise that even when everything seemed lost, sometimes strangers appeared with exactly what you needed most. Not gold, not money, but opportunity, dignity, and the chance to rebuild a life worth living.